Have you ever felt like the whole world just disappeared? The calls stop. The messages fade. The people you thought would always be there vanish without warning. You're left sitting in the quiet, not just alone, but empty. Like something inside you has cracked open and all that's left is silence. But what if I told you this wasn't an accident, that your loneliness was never a curse but a calling? This is the story of Elena Zhang, a woman who lost everything only to discover a truth that most people never dare to face. That sometimes the universe isolates you not to punish you, but to prepare you, not to break you, but to rebuild you into something unshakable. Her journey will shatter what you think you know about loneliness, and it just might change the way you see your own. If you're ready to find healing, meaning, and a light in the dark, hit subscribe now. Because this isn't just her story, it's a story we all walk. When the world finally grows quiet enough for us to hear ourselves again. Part 1. The breaking point when the world fades. San Francisco, California. A city of bridges, lights, and endless motion. And yet, for Elena Zhang, it had become unbearably still. It was a Thursday morning in late autumn when everything fell apart. The fog outside hung like a secret, pressing itself against the window pane of her downtown apartment. Elena stood motionless in the kitchen, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, phone in hand, staring at the message that simply read, "We've decided to go in a different direction. Thank you for your work with us." No warmth, no closure. Just silence, and a final punctuation mark at the end of 5 years. It was the third goodbye that month. First, Daniel, the man she had imagined a life with. Then Maya, her closest friend since architecture school, who slowly stopped answering calls. And now her job, her last anchor. She placed the phone face down on the counter and lowered herself to the floor like someone slowly surrendering to gravity. Her body folded into itself. No sobbing, just stillness. A kind of grief so complete it couldn't find sound. Elena wasn't unfamiliar with loneliness. She had been born into it. Raised in a tidy home in Fremont by immigrant parents who loved her through expectations more than through words. She had become a professional at putting on the right face, earning degrees, building resumes, climbing the stairs of achievement. She had always believed that if she did everything right, she would finally earn love that stayed. But now, as the city around her buzzed with life, Elena sat in the silence of her apartment wondering how someone who had done everything right could end up so invisible. She stood eventually. Not because she felt better, but because it was time to move. She hadn't eaten in nearly 24 hours. There was leftover rice in the fridge and a single hard-boiled egg. She made tea she didn't drink and stared out at the skyline she used to love. She used to believe that the view of the Bay Bridge was a promise of possibility, of beauty, of connection. Now it felt like mockery. Over the next few days, Elena went through the motions. She replied to emails with polite phrases that made her feel like a stranger in her own mouth. She scrolled social media, watching others live loud, filtered lives. Couples at pumpkin patches, friends at brunch, women laughing on beaches in places where the sky seemed to breathe. And all she could feel was the invisible wall between herself and the world. She reached out once, a text to Maya. "Can we talk soon? I really need someone." There was no reply. At first, she told herself Maya must be busy, but the truth seeped in slowly. Some people disappear when the party ends, when the light goes out, when you're no longer useful. Elena had always been the planner, the supporter, the one who showed up. But now she was the one in need, and nobody came. One night around 2 a.m., Elena sat curled on her couch beneath a blanket that didn't warm her. Her apartment felt cavernous, even with every light on. She turned on a meditation app she had downloaded months ago and never used. A soft voice began, "If you are alone, if you are hurting, know that this silence is not your enemy. It is your invitation." Elena let the words wash over her, and for the first time in days her eyes welled, not because the voice promised healing, but because, for the first time, someone, even if it was a voice from an app, didn't try to fix her. It simply saw her. The next morning, something shifted. She couldn't explain it. It wasn't clarity, not yet, but there was a crack of light where the numbness had been. Elena took a notebook from the shelf. On the first page, she wrote, "I don't know who I am without people needing me, but I want to find out who I am when no one is looking." That same day, she found an old email buried in her promotions folder, a flyer for a silent retreat in Kyoto, Japan. A Zen temple, 7 days, no talking, no phones, no distractions. She didn't know why, but she clicked. And without telling anyone, she booked it. It wasn't about healing yet. It was about survival. About escaping a city that felt like it was watching her unravel. The night before her flight, Elena packed lightly. A few clothes, a book she probably wouldn't read, her journal, and the necklace her grandmother had given her before she passed, a single pearl strung on red thread. For protection, her grandmother once said in Mandarin. She took one last look at her apartment, at the unwatered plants, the dishes in the sink, the empty spaces that once held photos now tucked away. She whispered to the quiet walls, "I don't know what's waiting for me, but I hope it's more than this." And then she left. On the plane, as the lights dimmed and passengers settled into silence, Elena stared out at the stars. Somewhere below, the world spun as always, full of meetings and texts and lovers and noise. But she was flying straight into the unknown, not toward a destination, but toward herself. Part 2. The cocoon, sacred retreat in silence. The air in Kyoto smelled like rain. Elena stepped off the bus with her bag slung over one shoulder, the hem of her coat brushing against puddles that shimmered with falling light. Japan in early November was a quiet kind of beautiful, trees in amber bloom, breath visible in the morning chill, streets whispering with the pace of unhurried feet. The Zen temple sat at the edge of a forest just outside the city, surrounded by cypress trees that had stood for centuries. She walked the final stretch alone, the road curving gently uphill as the noise of the world fell away behind her. The temple wasn't grand. It was humble and wooden, nestled beneath the embrace of the mountains. A carved stone sat near the entrance with faded kanji that translated to, "Silence reveals all things." A young monk greeted her with a nod and a small bow. No words, just a gesture of welcome. Elena bowed back, awkwardly but sincerely. Inside, the world was stripped to essentials, rice mats, sliding paper doors, the soft scent of incense lingering like memory. Her sleeping space was a single futon in a narrow room lit by morning sun and candlelight at night. She was handed a robe, a small schedule, a bowl and a pair of chopsticks, and then silence began. The first 24 hours were excruciating. No talking, no phones, no books, no music, just the breath, the endless, ceaseless breath. She struggled. Every meal felt like an echo chamber, every meditation period a war zone. Her mind wouldn't stop. It played old memories like haunted reruns. Daniel's last look before walking away, her boss's cold tone, Maya's unread messages. During walking meditation in the garden, she found herself crying without even realizing it. The gravel crunched under her feet. The wind moved the bamboo. And inside, her chest ached like it had been sealed shut for years and now cracked open by stillness. On the fourth morning, she noticed him. An older monk with a shaved head, weathered hands, and eyes like river stones. He moved slowly, with intention, watered plants as if blessing them, swept leaves with reverence. She learned later from another guest that his name was Master Kaido. He had lived here for 22 years, once a professor, then a cancer survivor, now a guide for those walking through spiritual storms. He never spoke to her, but somehow his silence spoke volumes. On the 5th day after the evening meal, he left a small folded paper at her door. On it were 4 words, hand-brushed in black ink: "A cocoon is sacred." Time became strange. Elena rose with the sun. She raked the garden, cleaned dishes, drank hot barley tea while watching steam rise in the cold. And she breathed. For the first time in her adult life, she actually breathed. There were moments of immense discomfort, a need to scream, to flee, to grab her phone and scroll for connection. But she stayed, and in staying, something began to shift. The silence was no longer a punishment. It was a space where the noise of the world dissolved and something ancient within her started to whisper. During meditation, strange memories surfaced, not just from adulthood, but from childhood. Her 7-year-old self sitting under a table while her parents argued. The teenage Elena who cried quietly in the school bathroom because no one had remembered her birthday. The college version of her, full of laughter on the outside, panic attacks on the inside. Each image rose like fog and passed. She didn't judge them, didn't resist. She let them come, let them leave, and in doing so felt lighter. On the 6th day it rained. Elena sat in the garden's open pavilion, wrapped in a wool shawl, watching the sky weep onto the stones. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she smiled. Because she finally understood something. She hadn't been broken. She had been buried by expectations, by roles, by everything everyone else had needed her to be. And here, in the middle of a forest, in a place where no one knew her name or her story, she was finally meeting herself. Not the version with the right answers. Not the daughter or the lover or the achiever. Just Elena. On her final night, Master Kaido approached her during tea. Without a word, he placed something on the table between them, a single golden leaf preserved in resin. On it, inscribed faintly in the same calligraphy, "The silence is not empty. It is full of answers." He bowed and left. Elena stared at the leaf for a long time, then pressed it between the pages of her journal. As the sun rose on her final morning, Elena packed her things slowly. Before leaving, she stood at the entrance, took a breath so deep it filled every inch of her lungs, and whispered aloud her first spoken words in 7 days. "Thank you for undoing me so I could become new." She turned and began walking down the mountain, not the same woman who had arrived, not yet fully healed, but no longer afraid of her loneliness. She now knew it was her teacher. Part 3. The mirror facing the self you've abandoned. The forest had its own kind of language. When Elena arrived at the cabin in Olympic National Park, Washington, it was early December. The Pacific Northwest had already wrapped itself in silence, thick green pines, mist hanging like memory, the scent of cedar and earth heavy in the air. The cabin sat near the edge of a river. It was small, worn with age, and utterly perfect. No internet, no neighbors, no distractions, just a fireplace, a wooden desk, and a window facing the woods. Elena had chosen this place deliberately. She wasn't running anymore. Now she was ready to meet what lived inside her. On the first night, she opened her journal and drew a simple sketch, a mirror cracked in several places with a small light glowing at its center. She titled it, "The Self I Forgot." Each morning after tea, she wrote. Not just events, but truths, sometimes a sentence, sometimes a page, sometimes just a word: numb, guilt, anger, hunger, hope. She didn't censor, didn't fix grammar, she just listened. One entry read, "I built a life trying to be needed, and now I don't know who I am when no one needs me." Another said, "I told myself I was independent, but the truth is, I was terrified of being forgotten." Writing became a kind of mirror, not just to reflect her, but to reveal her. On the third morning, she sat by the river with a blanket wrapped around her and whispered, "Where are you?" She wasn't speaking to anyone outside. She was calling to the version of herself buried beneath decades of noise. She closed her eyes, placed a hand on her heart, and imagined the child she used to be before grades, before relationships, before pressure shaped her. She saw a little girl in pigtails standing beside a playground, clutching a book because no one had asked her to play. And Elena wept, not for what had happened, but because she had never comforted that girl before, never told her, "You were always enough." Each evening, she lit a candle and sat in front of a mirror, real this time, for 10 minutes. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just looked at the lines, the fatigue, the grief in her eyes. And somewhere in that stillness, old versions of herself passed like ghosts. Elena at 21, crying in a dorm room after a breakup, pretending she was okay. Elena at 28, giving a presentation to executives while silently praying someone would ask if she was tired. Elena at 34, staring at her phone, rereading text from someone who had already moved on. She had been so busy surviving that she had forgotten to see herself. One night, after writing until her fingers ached, Elena built a fire outside in the ring behind the cabin. She brought with her a small stack of memories, printed emails, old letters, photos from a box she had packed but never unpacked after the breakup. One by one, she held each piece to her chest, breathed in, then let it burn. The birthday card from Daniel with the words always written in cursive. The award letter from the architecture firm she once bled herself dry to impress. The group photo from Maya's wedding where she stood smiling, already feeling invisible. As the flames consumed the paper, something in her loosened. She whispered, "I release the version of me who needed these to feel worthy." And when it was done, she stood in the cold, arms crossed, smoke rising into the night. It wasn't an ending. It was a reclamation. In the days that followed, she began noticing things again. The way the sunlight poured through the trees like liquid gold at 10 a.m., the crunch of frost beneath her boots. The comfort of warm socks and old jazz on the record player inside. She cooked simply oatmeal, roasted squash, herbal soups. She ate slowly, mindfully, thankful. She began humming to herself, not out of happiness, but peace. Near the end of her stay, as she walked along the trail by the river, she paused at a fallen log and sat. Birds called to one another in the distance. The wind moved through the branches like breath. And Elena realized something she hadn't known she needed to hear. I am no longer waiting to be chosen. I choose myself now. She didn't need an audience to feel alive. She didn't need applause to feel valuable. For the first time, she belonged to herself. The night before she left the cabin, Elena took out her mirror journal and wrote one final entry on the last page. She came into the woods to find quiet. She found her voice instead. She placed the golden leaf from Kyoto between the pages, tied the journal shut, and placed it beside her travel bag. Outside, it began to snow, and she stood barefoot for a moment on the porch, letting the cold remind her that she was here, alive, awake, and whole. Olympic National Park, Washington. The road stretched out before her like an unwritten sentence. It was a cold morning when Elena Zhang crossed into Washington state, her rental car humming softly beneath her hands. Outside the windshield, the landscape shifted from gray city edges into dense green wildness. Mountains rose like sentinels on the horizon, and the mist clung to the trees like breath that hadn't let go. She had chosen this destination not for its fame or comfort, but for its silence. Olympic National Park had always felt like a myth, a place people spoke of with reverence. Remote, ancient, untouched. The kind of place where people went when they wanted to disappear, or maybe to reappear. In the passenger seat lay a worn, leather-bound notebook, its cover soft from her fingertips. The mirror journal, her lifeline from Kyoto. In it were fragments of herself, the woman who had unraveled, the girl she had once been, the woman she was becoming. She hadn't written in it since the plane ride home, not because she had nothing to say, but because she needed to feel before she could speak again. This cabin in the woods was the next chapter. She didn't know what she would find. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. The path to the cabin narrowed into a gravel trail bordered by fir trees. The air was sharp with pine and damp moss. It was early December, and frost painted the grass like delicate lace. When she finally pulled up to the small wooden structure nestled between two hills, she exhaled so deeply it startled her. She had been holding her breath for years. The cabin was simple, dark wood walls, a small brick fireplace, a desk by the window, and a loft bedroom above a tiny kitchen. No television, no Wi-Fi, no distractions. Just her, the forest, and the sound of the river nearby, soft, steady, and eternal. She unpacked quietly, placing her journal on the desk, her folded clothes in the open-shelved wardrobe, and her tea into a small ceramic pot. Then she stood at the window, staring out at the woods like someone about to dive into deep water. The sun was setting, and the sky burned amber behind the trees. That night, Elena made soup, lentils, carrots, garlic, and sat cross-legged on the floor to eat it. There was no table, no music, just the sound of her chewing and the pop of firewood shifting in the hearth. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she just existed. But when she crawled into bed, she found herself unable to sleep. Her mind played loops, not chaotic ones like before, but slow, looping thoughts that echoed like footsteps in a hall. Why did I let him go without asking why? Was Maya really that fragile, or did she just not care? What if I've spent 30 years building a life I don't even want? What if there's nothing underneath the roles I've outgrown? At 2:13 a.m., she got up, walked to the desk, and opened the mirror journal. She wrote, "I thought silence would be peaceful, but it's a mirror, and I'm not sure I'm ready to see what's still trapped behind my smile." She woke before dawn. She boiled water, made tea, and wrapped herself in a blanket by the window. Outside, the river shimmered in soft pre-light. Deer tracks lined the frost-covered ground. There was no human sound for miles. She took the small round mirror she had brought, a gift from her mother years ago, and placed it on the floor. Lit a candle, sat in front of it. No filters, no makeup, no expressions to perform, just her face. Raw, uncurated, she sat for 5 minutes, then 10, then 15. Each second a kind of discipline. Not to judge, not to win, not to fix, but to see. At one point, her eyes blurred with tears. She didn't wipe them. She let them fall. When the timer rang, she opened the mirror journal. I don't know when I stopped looking at myself with kindness, but I want to start again. That evening, as rain pattered against the window, Elena made a fire and opened an old photo folder on her phone. She didn't browse with nostalgia. She was mining, excavating her own life. A photo from her 30th birthday, surrounded by friends, holding a cake, smiling wide. That night, she had cried in the shower because Daniel had forgotten the one thing she asked for: no work calls tonight. A graduation picture with her father who barely smiled. She remembered the car ride home. "We expect more now," he had said. A beach photo with Maya 2 years ago. That weekend had ended in a fight. Elena had paid for everything, organized every detail, and felt unseen the entire time. She stared at these images not to dwell in pain, but to rewrite the stories, to stop pretending those moments had been enough, to admit she had abandoned herself again and again for the sake of keeping others close. She wrote in the mirror journal, "I have played every part perfectly, except the one where I simply loved myself." Elena woke to fog so thick she couldn't see past the first row of trees. She made her tea slowly, warming her hands against the ceramic cup, and returned to the mirror on the floor. The candle flickered. The silence curled around her like a shawl. Today, she did something new. She sat in front of the mirror, closed her eyes, and whispered softly, "Little one, are you there?" She didn't know where the words came from, only that they felt right. At first, nothing, just breath, cold feet, the rustle of wind. Then an image rose from the quiet, a girl, 6 years old, sitting in the back of the classroom, coloring alone while the others played tag outside. She wore thick pink glasses. Her pigtails were messy, and her face, her beautiful, unsure little face, held an expression Elena knew all too well. "I'm trying to be okay so no one notices I'm not." Tears welled instantly. "I see you," she whispered. "I'm sorry I left you behind." She wrapped her arms around her knees and rocked slowly. And in that stillness something cracked, not in pain but in release. That evening she lit a second candle, one for the woman she had become, one for the girl she had left behind. She began listing every voice in her head, the ones that shaped her, scolded her, taught her how to disappear. Don't be too emotional. Success matters more than feelings. If they leave, it means you weren't enough. Be useful or be forgotten. You're fine, you're always fine. She wrote them down, one by one. Then read them aloud, voice trembling. After each line, she answered, "That's not true anymore." And when she finished, she ripped the page out and placed it into the fire. She watched the edges curl, then disappear into smoke. The next day, the fog lifted. Sunlight poured in through the cabin windows, and Elena felt, for the first time in weeks, something close to warmth. Not on her skin, but inside. She went for a long walk through the woods, listening to the birds, watching squirrels dart across fallen logs. She smiled at nothing, hummed an old song, picked up a pinecone and twirled it between her fingers like a sacred object. Midway down the trail, she found a clearing. A single tree stood at the center, wide, ancient, still. She sat beneath it, closed her eyes, and asked, "What made me feel alive before the world told me who to be?" Answers came in whispers, dancing barefoot on the balcony at 17, writing poetry under her covers in middle school, building blanket forts and naming stars out loud, singing without caring if she was good, laughing until her stomach hurt, alone just because. She opened her eyes, smiled, and whispered, "I remember you." That night she danced in her cabin, no music, just rhythm, no audience, just breath. On the seventh day, she began writing letters she never intended to send. To Daniel, "You didn't break me. I broke for a reason far bigger than you." To Maya, "I still love you, but I won't chase someone who disappeared the moment I stopped shining." To her father, "You wanted excellence, but I needed tenderness. I'm learning how to give that to myself now." To her younger self, "You were never too much. You were just too alive for people who hadn't learned how to hold fire yet." She folded each letter, tied them with string, placed them in a small wooden box she found in the cabin closet. "I'm not burning you," she whispered to the box. "You're not burdens, you're chapters." But there was one thing she did burn, an index card. On it she had written a sentence she no longer wanted to believe. "I only matter when I'm needed." She stared at the sentence for 5 full minutes. Then slowly she tore it down the middle. She set it aflame, watched it curl, felt the freedom flood in. In the mirror journal she wrote, "I used to think healing meant becoming strong enough to never hurt again. But now I think healing means learning how to hold myself when I do." She paused, then added, "I'm not trying to be whole for anyone else anymore. I'm just learning how to belong to me." On her final night in the cabin, Elena cooked her favorite meal, roasted root vegetables with garlic, toasted rye, and ginger tea. She lit every candle she had, played soft instrumental music on the old speaker she found in the back closet. She wore her softest sweater and thick socks and wrapped herself in a blanket by the fire. She wrote one final letter this time to no one. Just a line. "Thank you for not giving up on me even when I did." Then she slept, not because she was exhausted, but because she was held by herself, by silence, by the woods, by the universe that had led her here. The next morning she packed in silence, folded each item slowly, pressed her journal against her chest before tucking it safely into her bag. She stood on the porch one last time. The air was clean, cold, alive, she whispered. "This is not an ending, it's a remembering." And with that, she turned toward the world again. Part 4, the bridge creating connection without clinging. Santa Fe, New Mexico. You don't know how to re-enter the world after solitude. There's no manual, no checklist, only trembling steps into conversations where your voice feels too loud, too soft, too new. The desert had a heartbeat of its own. Elena stepped off the shuttle into the thin, golden light of New Mexico. The sky stretched endlessly above her, open, unapologetic, and blue in a way that almost hurt to look at. A breeze passed over her face, dry and honest. Everything about this place felt stripped to essence. No lush forests here, no city noise. Just rock, clay, wind, and light. She had chosen Santa Fe on instinct. Months earlier, while scrolling through a blog post on trauma and creativity, she had stumbled upon the Bridge Collective, an emotional healing residency nestled on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a retreat, it wasn't therapy, it was something in between. A space for women in transition to live communally, explore art, and unlearn the patterns that kept them small. When she read the tagline, "We are not here to fix you. We're here to walk with you while you become yourself again," something in her body said yes before her mind could interfere. The house sat on a mesa at the edge of the desert, all curved adobe and open glass. From the outside, it looked like it had grown from the earth. Inside, it felt like a temple, wood beams, polished floors, and art everywhere. Paintings, sculptures, textiles dyed in turmeric and indigo. Every object whispered something sacred. 6 women lived there. Most stayed for a few weeks, some for months. All were there because life had broken them open in some way: death, betrayal, illness, burnout. Elena's room was small and sunlit, with a hand-woven rug and a sliding door that opened to the horizon. There was a journal on the bed with her name stitched on the cover in thread. She opened it and found a note. "Welcome, Elena. You are not alone here." L.M. Lena was the first to greet her. She was tall, in her early 40s, with a face that had lived. Sharp cheekbones, warm eyes, gray strands braided into black hair, and the kind of presence that made you straighten your spine without knowing why. She didn't ask why Elena had come. Instead, she offered her a mug of hibiscus tea and said, "If you want to cry, the porch swing is the best place. If you want to scream, there's a hill behind the house no one will hear you from. And if you want to create, the paint is in the sunroom." Elena smiled, small, grateful. "What if I don't know what I want?" she asked. Lena's smile didn't falter. "Then that's a perfect place to begin." Life at the bridge was both structured and fluid. Mornings began with silent tea. Afternoons included optional circles: writing, painting, talking. Evenings were for communal dinners, laughter, and firelight. But no one was required to participate. Everyone moved at their own pace. Elena spent the first few days simply watching, the way people laughed with their entire bodies, the way silence was never awkward. The way Lena would place a hand on someone's shoulder and somehow say 100 things without speaking. She wrote in her new journal, "They're not trying to impress anyone here. They just are. I'm not sure I know how to do that yet." On the 5th night, during a group check-in, someone asked Elena, "What's been the hardest part of being you lately?" The question felt like a knife wrapped in silk. Her mouth opened before she could stop it. Letting people see me when I don't have something useful to offer. The room grew quiet. Lena looked at her, not with pity, but with recognition. There's a difference between being loved and being needed, Lena said softly. It's hard to trust the first one when you've lived most of your life earning the second. Elena's eyes burned, because it was true. She had spent decades being useful, the friend who helped move apartments, the colleague who stayed late, the partner who fixed everything. But here, no one needed her, and yet they were still offering warmth. One afternoon, Lena invited Elena to join her in the sunroom. "Let's paint something," she said. "I haven't painted since high school," Elena replied. "Perfect," Lena smiled. "Then your mind won't get in the way." They worked in silence. Lena layered colors on a canvas, bold, chaotic, free. Elena hesitated, then picked up a brush and began slowly, cautiously. Circles, threads, a figure with no face, a tree with roots that bled into the edge. Hours passed unnoticed. When they stepped back, they stared at their creation, a mess of beauty, unfinished, honest. Lena looked at Elena and said, "This is what it looks like when you stop hiding." Elena didn't speak. She just stood there seen. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Elena sat on the porch swing and scrolled through her phone contacts. Her thumb hovered over a name she hadn't touched in nearly 6 years. Jasmine, sister. They had grown apart after their mother died. Too many unspoken things, too many old roles, but now, Elena didn't want to perform anymore. She just wanted to connect. She pressed call. 1 ring, 2. "Hello," Jasmine's voice was cautious. Elena exhaled. "Hey, I'm not calling to fix anything. I just wanted to say I was thinking about you." Silence. Then a soft, surprised voice. "I was just thinking about you too." Elena smiled, her eyes wet. They didn't solve anything. They didn't talk long, but it was enough. A bridge had been built. The next morning, something subtle had changed. Elena wasn't quite sure what it was. Perhaps the way her shoulders felt softer as she walked into the kitchen, or how her gaze met the others more easily. No small talk, no performance, just presence. She brewed tea and sat beside one of the residents, a young violinist named Rachel, who had come to the collective after a near breakdown during a concert tour. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. Eventually, Rachel said without looking up, "People always want to know what I do. Here, they just want to know who I am. I don't think I've ever had that before." Elena nodded. The words pierced her in the quietest way. She had spent her entire adult life being known for what she did. Elena the architect, the achiever, the reliable one. But what if she let go of all that scaffolding? Who was she underneath? During a circle session later that week, Lena introduced a theme: relearning intimacy. "Intimacy isn't sex," she said. "It's truth. It's being witnessed without armor. It's the courage to say, 'Here I am,' even if your voice trembles." The group was quiet. Some shifted uncomfortably. Elena's heart pounded. She raised her hand. "I think I used to confuse attention with intimacy. If someone saw me, I thought that meant they loved me. But they were just looking." Lena nodded gently. Being seen isn't the same as being met. That sentence landed like a bell inside Elena. That night she returned to her room and began writing letters again. Not out of pain this time, but from clarity. To her younger self, "You were so desperate to belong. But now you get to choose who is worthy of belonging with you." To the version of her that begged for love, "You don't have to dance to be kept. You can just be." To the world, "I'm not shrinking anymore." She folded the letters, tied them with gold thread, and placed them in her suitcase, not to forget them, but to carry them forward. At the end of each woman's stay, Lena held a closing ceremony in the canyon behind the house. A ritual inspired by an old East Asian tale that people destined to meet are connected by an invisible red thread. But here, the thread symbolized something different. The connection to self, Lena explained, not someone else. You. On a clear, cold morning, Elena stood beneath a vast sky as Lena wrapped a thin red string around her left wrist. No knots, no loops, just a single line. To remind you, Lena said, that your own company is sacred. Elena's eyes stung. She nodded. Thank you for not trying to fix me. Lena smiled. You didn't need fixing, just returning. Elena took her last day to walk into Santa Fe alone. She strolled through the artisan markets, tasted chili chocolate from a street cart, and bought a small clay amulet etched with a spiral. In a local bookstore, she found herself drawn to a shelf labeled Ritual and Everyday Magic. Inside one book was a quote that made her pause. You cannot lose yourself. You can only forget. And every breath you take with awareness is a way home. She copied it into her journal. Back at the house, she FaceTimed Jasmine again. This time, it was Elena who said, I don't want to be right anymore. I just want to know you again. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't untangle years of silence. Instead, Jasmine showed her a plant she was struggling to keep alive. Elena gave her tips. They laughed. It felt ordinary, but sacred. The kind of simplicity Elena used to crave and sabotage at the same time. Now she just breathed it in. Lena presented their collaborative painting during the farewell circle. It had grown into a massive canvas of reds, blacks, golds, and ocean blue threads. The woman in the painting no longer looked faceless. She had her eyes open, wide, clear, steady. We named her Return, Lena said. Elena stepped forward and placed her hand on the painting's edge. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. As she left the bridge, her suitcase felt lighter, even though it was full. She wore the red thread on her wrist and carried the amulet in her pocket. Before getting into the rideshare to the airport, Lena pulled her into a hug. What will you do now? She asked. Elena smiled. I think I'll stop trying so hard to be someone and just let people meet me where I actually am. Lena nodded. That's the most radical thing you can do. Part 5. The light returning to the world as a beacon. When Elena stepped off the train at Embarcadero Station, the city felt like a memory she had lived inside once, but not one she belonged to anymore. The rhythm of San Francisco, its fog, its noise, its breathless pace was the same. But Elena, she had changed. The skyline still gleamed, the Bay Bridge still stretched across the water like an exhale of steel and sky. But as she walked past old coffee shops, glass office towers, and familiar intersections, she noticed what had always been missing. She used to move through the city like a ghost chasing validation. Now she walked like someone home in her own body. No rush, no need to prove, just steps, just breath. She opened the door to her apartment and expected to feel overwhelmed by dust and memory. Instead, she was calm. The plants she had asked a neighbor to water had surprisingly survived. The sun still poured through the same windows. The couch still dipped where her body always curled, but everything felt lighter. She didn't rush to check emails. Didn't panic about messages or news. She made tea, lit a candle, opened the windows and let the wind move through like a blessing. That night she sat on her couch with her journal and wrote, I didn't come back as the same woman. So this place doesn't get to treat me the same either. The idea came slowly. At first, it was just a thought during a walk along Crissy Field. She watched the fog roll in over the bay, saw the silhouettes of runners, dog walkers, couples, and loners. People walking together and walking apart. She thought, how many of them feel like they're drowning in silence right now? That night she opened her laptop, created a new folder, named it the Lighthouse Project. She didn't have a business plan, didn't know exactly what it would be, but she knew this. She had walked through the dark. She had found light, and now she wanted to leave lanterns for others. Over the next few weeks, Elena worked quietly. She sketched ideas, outlined short audio meditations, wrote daily prompts for journaling, and recorded voice notes with titles like, "You're not broken, you're becoming." The weight of silence is always a bad thing. Loneliness is a language, let's translate it. She reached out to a few contacts, therapists, writers, former colleagues who had quietly messaged her after her last LinkedIn post saying, "I stepped away. I'm healing. I'm rebuilding." Together, they co-created a soft launch, an online space with no ads, no likes, no pressure, just quiet wisdom, just honest presence. They chose a motto, "Come as you are, leave with yourself." The first video call had 9 participants. One woman sat in a car parked outside her job. A man tuned in from a kitchen in Toronto. A single mom nursed her baby in silence, tears in her eyes. No one turned their cameras off. No one pretended. Elena opened with a single line, "You don't have to be okay to belong here." Silence. A few nods. One stifled sob. Then they began, a slow, honest unraveling of pain, aloneness, and longing, not dramatic, just real. When the call ended, someone typed in the chat, "For the first time in weeks, I feel less invisible." Elena closed her laptop with wet cheeks and whispered, "Let this be the beginning." Inevitably, the past began to knock, an email from Maya, "Hey, I saw the project, it's beautiful, I know I disappeared, I don't expect anything, just thank you for doing this." No attachment, no request to reconnect, just a note. And Elena felt peace. She didn't reply immediately. She waited. Then wrote back, "Thank you for seeing it. I'm glad we were part of each other's story, even if only for a season." No bitterness, no drama, just closure. One afternoon, she stopped at her old favorite cafe, the one where she and Daniel used to meet. The barista, a man named Cavi, still remembered her. "You look different," he said. "Lighter." Elena smiled. "I feel different." "Same order?" She paused, then nodded. "No, actually, let's try something new." Outside the cafe, she noticed a woman on a bench, shoulders shaking, crying softly, trying not to be seen. Elena didn't approach immediately. She simply sat a few feet away, sipped her drink, waited. After a moment, she gently asked, "Would you like company or space?" The woman looked up, surprised, then whispered, "Company, I think." They sat in silence for several minutes. No introductions, no advice, just presence. Before she left, the woman looked at her and said, "Thank you for not trying to fix me." Elena smiled. "That's how I started healing, too." Word spread faster than she expected. Within 6 weeks, the Lighthouse Project had over 400 subscribers, most of them quiet souls who said little but stayed. They came from different cities, different ages, different aches. One man in Nebraska shared how he'd been silent since his divorce 2 years ago. A young woman in Johannesburg wrote that she hadn't felt safe in her own body since her brother died. But each week, they logged in. Not for solutions, but for solidarity. They didn't come to be fixed. They came to remember themselves. Elena began a new series of short recordings titled Lighthouse Stories, 10-minute true reflections from people on their healing journeys. No dramatic endings, just honesty. The tagline, "You are not alone in the dark. Someone else is learning to light a candle too." One morning, she received an invitation from a local nonprofit that supported women transitioning out of incarceration. They had heard her speak on a podcast interview and wanted to know if she would facilitate a session. "Nothing big," the coordinator wrote. "Just a few women, just your story. They don't need a guru. They need a voice that doesn't lie." Elena reread the message several times. Her body buzzed with both fear and recognition. Say yes, something deep inside whispered. So she did. The room was small and smelled of lavender and ink. 10 women sat in a circle, some with tattoos curling up their arms, others with eyes that had seen too much too soon. No one pretended to be anything. Elena walked in with no script, no slides, just her journal, and her breath. She opened with the same words she had once written alone in the dark. Loneliness isn't punishment. Sometimes it's permission. For the next hour, she told the truth, not as a polished speaker, but as someone who had broken and healed and broken again. She shared her story of chasing perfection, of losing everything, of facing herself in silence, of learning how to hold space instead of perform strength. She didn't speak to them. She spoke with them. When she finished, no one clapped. But one woman, Maria, maybe late 20s, spoke first. Nobody ever told me I was allowed to be alone and still whole. Another added, they always said I was broken. I think I just wasn't done growing yet. They sat together for another hour, writing letters to their past selves. No one wanted to leave. Over the next few weeks, Elena noticed something beautiful. Her life was no longer defined by productivity, but by presence. She didn't rush to finish things. She let them unfold. She no longer answered every message right away. She honored her energy. She walked to the farmer's market every Sunday, bought fresh bread, smiled at strangers, not to be liked, but to be open. Sometimes she shared a bench with someone eating lunch in silence. Sometimes she offered a quote to someone who looked lost in thought. One day she simply left sticky notes in public places. It's okay to not know what's next. The most beautiful people I've met were still figuring it out. You are enough even now. She didn't leave her name. She didn't need to. Elena started noticing the difference between connection and attachment. At a dinner gathering with old acquaintances, she found herself drifting away from the surface-level chatter. Not out of judgment, just alignment. Later that night, one woman she hadn't seen in years pulled her aside. You feel calmer. Like you're not chasing the room anymore. Elena nodded, soft and steady. I'm just here now. The woman looked down. How did you do it? Elena smiled. I stopped trying to be liked. And I started listening to who I was when no one was watching. She was invited to speak at a community mindfulness gathering in Golden Gate Park. Hundreds came. Elena stood at a podium under the open sky, heart pounding. But she wasn't afraid because she wasn't performing. She began not with advice, but with silence, a full minute. Then she spoke. I thought I had to be extraordinary to be loved, but it turns out I only had to be honest. She told them about the cabin, the mirror, the red thread, the porch swing, the woman crying on a bench, the circle of women who didn't clap but heard her anyway. At the end, she didn't offer tips or steps. She offered a question. What might happen if you stopped trying to fix your loneliness and started listening to what it's trying to show you? The wind rustled through the trees. A few people cried, many just sat still, not needing to be more, just enough. Jasmine visited from Portland the following week. They walked along the bay, ate tacos in Dolar's Park, laughed like sisters who had skipped years but not heart. They didn't rehash old fights. They didn't diagnose their distance. They simply began again. Jasmine hugged her before leaving and whispered, I like this version of you. She feels more real. Elena pulled back and said, I didn't become someone else. I just stopped hiding. One day, while picking up coffee, a woman approached her. Mid-40s, glasses, nervous smile. Are you Elena Zhang from the lighthouse? Elena blinked. Yes. The woman's eyes welled. Your audio about silence isn't a punishment. I listened to it every day for a month after my dad died. I just wanted you to know you helped me stay alive. They stood in quiet tears for a moment. Elena took her hand and said, Then we helped each other. You kept listening. I kept healing. They hugged, and just like that, another bridge built. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon. Elena was walking home from the market, a canvas bag filled with oranges, fresh basil, and handmade candles. She passed through a small alleyway behind a neighborhood center where she'd often seen people resting, sometimes unhoused individuals or teenagers escaping noise at home. That day, a young man, barely 20, was slumped against the wall, trembling, his breath rapid, eyes unfocused. Panic attack, or worse. She crouched beside him slowly, keeping her voice soft and even. "Hey, you're okay, I'm here. I won't touch you unless you say so." No response, but he wasn't moving away. She sat beside him, leaving space between them, and began breathing deeply, slow, grounded breaths he could hear. After a minute, she whispered, "Breathe with me. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, still no words, but the boy's chest began to slow just a little. She pulled a bottle of water from her bag and gently set it next to him. "This is for you when you're ready." They stayed there 5 minutes. 10 more, then he said, barely audible, "I thought I was dying." She nodded gently. "Sometimes the body says things we haven't said yet. You're not alone, you're not broken, you're just full." He looked at her for the first time. "Why are you helping me?" She smiled. "Because someone once sat with me when I couldn't breathe either." 3 weeks later, Elena received a letter at her mailbox. No return address, just a folded piece of paper. "I don't know your name, but I found out yours. I went home that night. Told my mom I was tired of pretending. We cried for hours. I'm getting help now. I didn't need you to fix me. I just needed someone to sit there. Thank you for not looking away." She held the letter to her chest and cried, not out of sadness, but because she finally understood the weight of her own healing. It was never just for her. It had always been for whoever came next. That weekend, she wrote 7 emails. To the woman who'd hosted the cabin in Oregon, to Lena Morales and the Bridge Collective, to Rachel the violinist, to the stranger on the bench, to Jasmine. Each message said the same thing in different ways. "Thank you for being a mirror when I needed one. The light I found in myself was sparked by you." She didn't need a reply. The sending was the sacred part. One morning, sitting on the fire escape with her tea and journal, Elena wrote, "Loneliness is not a flaw, it's a doorway, a teacher, a soft, aching space where we are invited to remember our soul. If we can sit in it, not fix it, not numb it, not rush through it, but sit with it, then we become the kind of person who can hold others the way we once needed to be held." She closed the journal and watched the sky brighten with morning. She was no longer afraid of being alone, because now she knew, "I am never truly alone when I'm present with myself." She created one final feature on the Lighthouse Project site, a 24/7 audio called "Hold Me in the Dark." It wasn't advice. It wasn't teaching. It was Elena's voice saying, "You are not a burden. You are not too much. You are not alone." Simple, warm, human. People began playing it while falling asleep. Nurses on night shift, grievers in empty homes, mothers in postpartum loneliness. Men recovering from trauma they never spoke of. No marketing, no growth hacks, just impact. Months later, Lena invited Elena back to the Bridge Collective, not as a resident, but as a guest teacher. She returned with a red thread still tied loosely around her wrist. She stood before the newest residents and said, "I'm not here to inspire you. I'm just a woman who once broke quietly and built herself again, also quietly. You don't have to be loud to shine. You don't have to be whole to belong. You just have to be honest enough to begin again." And as she sat in the circle, listening more than speaking, she realized the lighthouse was never about saving ships. It was simply about being visible when someone else needed light. Part 6. The Sacred Story, You Were Always Meant to Be Here. It was late autumn in San Francisco. Leaves spun like dancers across the sidewalk. The fog was back, wrapping the skyline in its cold breath, and the city moved with its usual rhythm, fast, distracted, hungry. But Elena walked differently now. She had nothing to chase, and so everything came to her. The stranger's smile, the quiet seat on the bus, the sunset that lingered just a little longer as if saying, "You made it." She had finally understood something that took her 38 years to hear. I was never waiting for someone to choose me. I was waiting for myself to return. One afternoon, she returned to the botanical garden, the very place she once sat months ago, hollow and scared, praying silently that her isolation had some hidden meaning. She stood before the same koi pond where she had once asked, "What's wrong with me?" This time she smiled at her reflection. Nothing was wrong. You were just empty enough to be filled. She sat quietly, tears unspooling down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from deep reverence for the version of herself that survived the silence. In her apartment drawer was a letter she had written at the cabin, one addressed to herself. She read it aloud now, sitting at her kitchen table, the window cracked open to let in the cool night air. Dear Elena, you think your loneliness means you've failed. But what if it means the world has finally grown quiet enough for you to hear yourself? Stop running, stop reaching. You are not unlovable. You are simply unused to receiving love that doesn't cost your performance. Let this silence be sacred. Let it hurt if it must. But don't leave it too quickly. Everything you've ever sought, safety meaning connection, will find you. When you stop trying to deserve it, she folded it, and this time, she didn't put it back in the drawer. She tucked it into a new envelope and mailed it. To herself. To the woman she was. To the one she would become again and again. Elena's story became more than a project. It became a movement, not a loud, viral, flashy one, but a quiet revolution of returning. The Lighthouse Project became a space where people hosted silent Sunday circles in their towns. Letters of compassion were written and exchanged anonymously. Artists created pieces inspired by the sacredness of solitude. Therapists shared her reflections as part of trauma recovery journeys. But Elena stayed behind the scenes. She knew the real work wasn't in being seen, it was in helping others see themselves. One day, she received a video message from a college student named Harper. Big glasses, nervous voice. I watched your first video during a panic attack in the library. I was so ashamed of being alone all the time. But when I heard you say, sometimes the universe isolates you to heal you in ways connection never could. I stopped fighting it. I started journaling. I started walking alone, not to escape, but to listen. I started becoming me. I don't know you, but I love the version of myself you helped me find. Elena closed her laptop and cried softly. It was never about changing the world. It was always about giving someone permission to change their own. One day, while at a bookstore, Elena sat near the poetry section flipping through a Mary Oliver collection. A woman sat beside her, older, quiet, with a silver braid. They exchanged small smiles. Then the woman said something that startled her. I feel like I know you. Elena laughed, maybe in another life. The woman nodded. Or maybe in the parts of myself I've been too afraid to meet. They talked for an hour about grief, about stillness, about love that doesn't demand explanation. Before parting, the woman said, "You remind me that there's more to come, even now, especially now." Late one evening, Elena returned to the red thread tied to her wrist. It had frayed at the edges. The color faded to pink. She smiled at it for a long time. Then, with steady fingers, she untied it, not out of rejection, but because she no longer needed the reminder. The thread had done its work. She now carried the knowing inside her. You are the home you were always seeking. She decided to write it all down, not a guide, not a memoir, but a sacred story. One told through journal entries, poems, sketches, and real moments. She titled it, "You Were Always Meant to Be Here." The first page read, "This is not a story about becoming special. This is a story about becoming real, about learning to love the silence, to sit with the ache, and to walk back into the world, carrying your own light." On the last page, Elena wrote a message addressed to the reader, to the lonely, to the waiting, To the quiet warriors hidden inside everyday people, you may not know me, but I know you. I see you, the one sitting alone at night wondering if anyone will ever understand, the one who keeps shrinking to be easier to love, the one who stayed awake after everyone else fell asleep. This is your sign. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. You are not lost. You are being rewritten, one quiet breath at a time. Welcome home. There are stories that entertain you, stories that teach you, and then there are stories that recognize you. This is one of those. At first glance, Elena Zhang's story may seem like the quiet unfolding of a woman's journey through a personal crisis. But in truth, it's a mirror held up to the heart of modern existence, a reflection of what so many of us go through behind closed doors, beneath composed smiles, in moments when no one is watching. Her descent into isolation wasn't dramatic, it was ordinary. And that's what made it so powerful, because most of us don't crash spectacularly. We unravel in silence. We wake up one morning and feel the dull ache of distance, from others, from life, from ourselves. We open our phones, scroll endlessly, attend meetings, perform our roles all while nursing an invisible wound. The fear that we're no longer needed, no longer seen, or maybe worse, that we never truly were. For Elena, that fracture began subtly, through a slow disconnection from purpose, a failed relationship, a fading sense of worth in a city that only applauded her productivity, not her humanity. But the real story began not with the falling apart, but with what she did with the silence that followed. When the world grew quiet around her, when calls went unanswered, when validation stopped coming, when even her own voice seemed foreign, Elena did something most people spend years avoiding. She stayed, she didn't numb, she didn't run, she listened. In a small cabin in Oregon, away from all the noise, Elena met someone she'd avoided for years herself. It wasn't glamorous. It was raw, awkward, painful. She faced her own reflection in the silence. The memories she had pushed down, the shame she had coded in busyness, the fears she had dressed as ambition. But slowly, breath by breath, she stopped resisting the ache. And when she stopped resisting, she discovered something astonishing. Loneliness wasn't a curse. It was a calling, a sacred invitation to reorient her entire life, not around productivity, perfection, or performance, but around presence. In the quiet, she wrote letters to her past selves. She forgave. She wept. She remembered who she was before the world told her who to be. And for the first time in decades, she didn't feel alone in her own body. After the cabin, Elena didn't rush back to her old life. Instead, she traveled to Santa Fe and joined the Bridge Collective, a space not of healing through therapy or coaching, but healing through shared presence. There, among others on the path, artists, mothers, teachers, wounded souls learning to breathe again, Elena discovered a truth that would redefine intimacy for her. Being seen isn't the same as being met. She realized how often she had confused attention with love and connection with attachment. She learned the power of witnessing without fixing, of sitting beside someone without the need to perform for them. In circle sessions, on porch swings, in silent meals and tender glances, Elena reclaimed the beauty of simply being. She didn't have to explain her pain. She only had to honor it. When Elena returned to San Francisco, she didn't try to catch up. She returned as someone new, still quiet, but with a steadiness that could not be faked. Instead of resuming her old roles, she created the Lighthouse Project, an online space where people navigating loneliness, grief, and silence could gather without pressure, judgment, or performance. She didn't present herself as an expert, but as a mirror, someone who had sat in the dark and learned to light a candle. She hosted circles, created gentle meditations, wrote reflections. But more than anything, she modeled what it looked like to live without needing to be fixed or fix others. Her most powerful gift wasn't in her words, but in her way of being, calm, spacious, true. There were no stages, no fame, no explosions. Her healing became visible in moments like these, sitting beside a stranger in an alley having a panic attack, whispering, "You're not broken, you're just full." Leaving sticky notes on park benches that read, "You're not late, you're right on time." Listening to a young woman in Johannesburg who had grieved in silence for years, until one of Elena's voice notes reminded her she didn't have to perform strength anymore. These weren't random acts of kindness. They were intentional acts of presence, and they changed lives. At the bridge, Lena had once tied a red thread around Elena's wrist, a symbol of sacred connection to self. Months later, in the stillness of her apartment, Elena finally untied it. Not in rejection, but in reverence, because she no longer needed a reminder. She had become the lighthouse, the anchor, the soft, unwavering presence she had always searched for in others. At its core, this story is not about Elena. It's about all of us, because we live in a world that celebrates noise and dismisses silence. A world that rewards speed and punishes stillness. A world where loneliness is treated like a disease to be cured, not a doorway to be walked through. But Elena's journey reveals the truth. Loneliness is not evidence that you are unloved. It is evidence that your soul is calling you inward. We're so used to seeking answers outside, relationships, titles, possessions, that we forget the quiet voice waiting for us inside. But that voice, it's still there, it never left. It's the same voice that whispers to you at 2 a.m. The one that asks, "Is this all there is?" That voice is not despair. It's an invitation to return, to recenter, to remember who you were before the world taught you to forget. If you're listening to this and feeling like Elena could be me, then hear this deeply. You are not behind, you are not broken, you are not too much. You are not too late, you are being prepared. Your silence is not punishment, it is preparation. Your loneliness is not weakness, it is wisdom asking to be heard. And when you stop running from it, you'll find that your loneliness was never trying to hurt you. It was trying to lead you home. Back to your soul, back to your story, back to the person you were always meant to be. If this story moved you, please take a moment to support this channel. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell. Leave a comment with what part touched your heart the most. And share this with someone who might be sitting in the dark, waiting for a light they didn't know they could carry themselves. Your support gives us the energy and love to continue telling stories like this, stories that heal, transform, and awaken. From my heart to yours, thank you for walking this journey with us. The next story begins soon. Until then, keep the light on.